Today is September 3rd, 2024. Welcome to Native Calgarian. Oki, Naganago, Mekoche Chistokom Oki, or Naro Daga Dekots Nagotine Siku Saradi. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use they, them pronouns and would never correct someone over she, her. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake tribe in Treaty 11 in Delaney. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene nation is uninvited to this area of Clincho Tine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary or in Blackfoot, Mohkinstsis as Michelle Elliott, an English name that has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. Acknowledging proximity to whiteness is important because the darker the skin, the more racism a person experiences in colonial spaces. My late great-grandfather is Milo B. Wool from Deline, and his daughter, Alice, is my now late granny. My mother and I are Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution. As a Canadian Indian Act imposed status card is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous people's inherent rights. I recognize the importance of it now that I've been accused of being a pretend Indian. Indigenous Two-Spirit or the Indigenous 2S LGBTQ2+ and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socioeconomic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. According to the 2023 Quality of Life Report from the Calgary Foundation, 31% of racialized Calgarians cannot find suitable employment. I can argue that because I know firsthand. I'm not a social worker nor an elder, nor do I speak on behalf of all Indigenous peoples, but I share my journey as a Dene mother navigating this colonial, misogynistic, racist world in 2024. As a trauma-informed Dene woman who has attempted to run, joined harmful colonial parties, spent money to be at expensive conventions, left my home to travel to those conventions just to vote on incomplete policies that still allow for colonial incarceration, a denial of justice, a denial of health services, racism, colonial trauma, and genocide of Indigenous and Black peoples. I have worked to continue, reports to advocate for, and attempt to work within these systems meant to harm me and my community. I think of all of this today, and I hope we honor the many Indigenous lives lost for this so-called country named Canada. I hope you see your role in stopping harm, and as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation and as a treaty partner. Pride Month should never be 1 month. It's important to understand the straight agenda and gendered violence was and is forced on these lands by Christian outsiders. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as the guest and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner in a so-called time of reconciliation. Can they be performative? Of course. It's important that they have meaning. I encourage every non-Indigenous person to introduce themselves with an acknowledgement of their ancestors, stories of displacement, and how you perceive your role as a treaty partner, a citizen of Canada, a refugee, or other land displacement. So we as Indigenous people know how safe you are to be around. If you don't know how to pronounce your local Indigenous nations' names, won't say your pronouns, won't say your story of origin, won't acknowledge stolen lands, won't acknowledge imposed economic oppression, your role in reconciliation, I determine how safe you are to be around my community, my family, and myself, because we face the most colonial violence based on ignorance or worse, willful anti-Indigenous biases. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance is Indigenous 101 because it immediately addresses colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught today in Canadian schools nationally. That's why settlers and those who call themselves Native Calgarians or whatever town you're from show me that you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. Jesse Winty's book Unreconciled explains this perfectly, as do many Indigenous authored books. Land Back is a movement that could save the planet from climate change created by capitalism and colonialism, but it would be a part of a treaty partnership, part of meaningful reconciliation, and honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. As a former geomatics drafter, I'd be happy to teach you more, but you'll have to pay me. So go to nativecalgarian.com. I'm speaking to you on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south the imposed U.S.-Canadian border are the Blackfeet, or the Omska-Bigani, and north of the border are the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani of the Confederacy. These lands are Treaty 7, signed September 22nd, 1877, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy and now the Stoney, or the Good Stoney, formerly Wesley, the Chiniki, and Bearspaw nations of the Yeeth, Nakota, and the Dene from Tsuut'ina. We used to call them the Stony Nations, not the Dene from Tsuut'ina, though, or the Dene from the Tsuut'ina. I think I said Siksika. I can't remember what I said. Let me just say that one more time. The Stony Nakota, they have changed their names in general. And I just seen Morley changed to their new name, and the Wesley has changed now to the Good Stony. So there's the Good Stony, the Chiniki, and the Bearspaw of the Stony. And I just want to make that really clear. And they came along with the Dene from Tsuut'ina afterwards in 1877, whereas before this was just all Blackfoot Confederacy. I always acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit status, and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. All non-Indigenous are treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or your questions. Also, giving a review helps, whatever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe, and you can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and BIM posts on social media. And today I'm so lucky to have a guest. I'd love for you to introduce yourself in your way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michelle. What a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Yes, my name is Tchadas Leo. I am Indigenous from the Homalco First Nation, which is here in Canada, Turtle Island. I'm also Indigenous from the Still-Wamish tribe of Indians down the state of Washington from my father's side. I'm also South American from my mother's side, Peruvian and Argentinian. So quite the mix, but yeah, I grew up on the reserve in Homalco. The original reserve was up in Butte Inlet on the mainland of British Columbia. And then, as we all know, with contact and treaty and all these things, the reserve ended up in Campbell River, and that's where I grew up. And then again, my grandfather, being a fisherman from the Still-Wamish tribe of Indians, worked his way up the coast and found my grandmother and had one child, and that was my father, and here I am. Anyways, long explanation of my Indigenous heritage, but that's who I am. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for letting me introduce myself.
Oh, vice versa. I'm so happy that you're here, and thank you for that background. I was stalking a bit of you on your page, and I seen that you were also from South America. So I'm so glad you gave us all that context. And just so you know, I was this like little nerd from the prairies that went out to Comox. So I just have a love for that area. And of course, at that time, we never talked about Indigenous people, and we certainly didn't acknowledge the land that we were on. So I just say
Yeah.
thank you for all those wonderful, safe times that I got to be in that area and just be able to be safe. And so
Yeah.
many people I know were safe there too. So I'm grateful to you, and I love that area that you got to call home, because it is one of the most beautiful places on earth, I think.
It
Um,
definitely is, yeah, for sure. And
yeah.
I forgot to thank the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional
Mm.
territory I'm recording out of right now, which is out of the Czech studios, just in the boardroom. But so definitely want to acknowledge the Lekwungen peoples and the Kose Luchu, Nuchang, and Kukwak, which are the combining nations here on Vancouver Island. So
I'm really honored to have you here also as a journalist because um, growing up, I didn't get to see you. I didn't get to see me. I didn't get to see that. And I started Native Calgarian podcast for that media representation because I just felt like there wasn't really the conversations of what was really happening in our area. And as you know, a lot of Indigenous stories just get swept under the rug. And I mean, I would argue a lot has changed since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but there's still a lot more work to do and a lot more representation to be had. So I just want to
yeah.
say thank you as a journalist for doing that work and becoming a journalist by colonial standards so that we can do this work within those spaces. And I know it's not easy being in colonial spaces, so I have a deep respect for what you do. And I'm just reading this book here for our next book club, and
Angela Starrett.
yeah, she is also a journalist, and I've read kind of a bit of her story on Twitters and such. So it's exciting to actually talk to an Indigenous journalist, and I'd love to hear what made you decide to go into that field, how the journey was, and anything else you'd like to share. Maybe there's an inspiring journalist listening that would love to hear what you have to say about that.
For sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'd love to tell you sort of why I decided to do this. And before you asked the question, you said I never saw you growing up, and that's how I felt about this whole situation too. Is, I remember watching the news with my parents around dinner time, and just not seeing a version of myself who looked like me, who talked like me, or had maybe some representation that made me feel like I was also on the screen as well too. So that came from a pretty young age. Whether I knew it or not at the time, I just really liked video cameras. I liked filming. I like photography, and I had a non-for-profit TV station in Camp River, just north of Vancouver Island here. And they came to my school and they did this whole talk about, like, this is what we do at the TV station, and we take in, volunteer students, a couple per year. And so I instantly just kind of hopped on it without really knowing that, that representation, value of representation would be dealt with at a later date. So I just kind of hopped on and it more for the train of just being creative and working with technology and also finding my voice. I was kind of right in the middle of puberty, trying to like talk on screen and being a child. I have a half sister, but grew up mostly as an only child. Really feeling this overcompensation, talking to adults and hanging out in a room with adults when I was 12, 13, 14 years old with no other siblings. And I think a lot of that just kind of developed naturally, and that's why I liked filming. So I started filming at a very young age. So from 12 to 18 years old, I worked for CRTV and eventually Shaw TV. And then I took this very long pause. And I won't bore you too much with it, but I can summarize by saying between leaving school, I leaving high school, I went and studied digital media studies at Vancouver Island University, and then I ended up in the car industry, in the entrepreneurial industry. I ran and sold a couple businesses, and then I've also worked in the hospitality industry. So I kind of just ventured around, trying to find my place on what I think I should do based on money or convenience or time. And like many people, when COVID hit, we all started making choices and decisions that maybe we wouldn't have done if we just hadn't stopped for a second and taken a breath, right?
Mhm.
So, so I did that, and I was managing a hotel, restaurant, and bar, and obviously COVID shut that right down. And my wife said, "What was the one thing you did growing up, or what was the last job you had where you just felt like it wasn't a day of work and it was just something valuable?" And technically, the longest place I've ever been at was at that TV station from 12 to 18 years old.
Mm.
So at that point, I felt like, you know what, that didn't feel like a day of work. I love that stuff. And then, yeah, that conversation happened. At the same time, I was having conversations with Czech, where I work now, and they wanted the very first podcast to be Indigenous. And so that's kind of where the podcast journey started, right?
Mhm.
And then I was like, oh, there again, you talked about representation. I'm like, oh, there's nobody doing that at the station. There's nobody doing it at a lot of stations here. It's getting better, but like you said,
Yeah.
it's oh, there can always be more. So that's where I started my podcasting journey. Then, walking in and out of the studio, I realized I wanted to be here more than once a week to record for 20 minutes, and then I decided I'm going to go to school to be a journalist, even though I'd done some very minor community video work, but actual, journalism on what makes the news, I haven't had any formal education. So
Mm.
off I went, and left my family part time for 2 years. My family remained on the. My wife was pregnant, by the way.
Oh
When I
my
t- when
goodness.
she was te- when she was when she was telling me what's that one thing you do, I said I'll go to journalism school, and this she's like, great. Not knowing, bless her heart, that the only school was in Burnaby, and we live on Vancouver Island. So yeah, and so yeah, she can't do any of this without her. So I always make sure to thank her because she took care of our son and raised him very well for the first 2 years of his life because I was on planes and ferries and cars. And if I wasn't in a classroom, I was home for a day and a half and then I'd leave again. And
Sure.
yeah, it was a sacrifice for that representation. I really, really knew that it needed to be done.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know how badly. I think the media world needed more Indigenous people to be a part of it because as I was coming out of school, even during school, all these amazing opportunities to share my story, share my people's story, sharing other people's stories, it all just started happening. So it's still happening so fast, but it
Yeah.
happened so fast for somebody who hadn't even gone out of school yet. I think that's what made me really feel like I was making the right choice.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm so happy you did, first and foremost, and thank you. And I do know what it feels like to be like, man, it's such a sacrifice in order to go to post-secondary. And I don't think people always understand how hard that is at times. And I don't know, it always seems so much more progressive out in BC, but I know here it's not very progressive. So a lot of racial battle fatigue's a real issue out here. Um,
Hmm.
and I'm sure it's not that much different in BC. And I've
Yeah,
been, yeah. So,
Yeah, it's definitely not like the race. Like I personally don't experience it as much anymore as I did more in high school. As in times have changed here in BC and in the rest of the world in some cases. So,
mhm.
I one thing for me that was most important is when I was signing on to work at any broadcast center was that I didn't want to feel this level of tokenism. That was the most important thing for me is that I didn't want to just be hired just because I'm good at talking and I'm Indigenous and I just tick the two boxes, right? I wanted to feel like I belong. And that happened here, right? And so
Good.
I very quickly realized that wasn't the case. Czech wanted to do something so meaningful, and we're still doing it to this day, and it's grown so much more. So,
That's awesome because there's so many great stories to tell out from that area. So, for me, I when I was stalking your profile, I'm like, oh, I gotta like check here, and I gotta start following so that I know where to look for some news.
mm.
We have a great outlet here named Windspeaker, and I love their work, and they have a
I do
radio
know wind
station.
speaker as well too.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're great. Yep,
yeah.
yep,
So, like, what try to follow all the Indigenous folks, and APTN's doing great work as well. But it's just like we need more, we need more, we need more. And until
yeah,
it's like more integrated, I think, I'll
for
probably
sure.
always feel that way.
For sure, yeah. And there's one thing that I always say too, especially as an Indigenous journalist, and I'll get my non-Indigenous colleagues, whether it was in school or if I'm just at a conference or whatever, and there's sometimes this fear that non-Indigenous journalists can't do these Indigenous stories,
Mhm.
and that I don't agree with because even if we hired, let's say BC gets 100 more Indigenous journalists, we would still miss 100 more stories. So there's not enough of us, and then there will never be. So it's something that I think we all got to do together. And there is really great training out there for people to learn how to, do Indigenous stories in a sensitive way. There's workshops and conferences. I've been a part of those in the past to, give examples for people and teach people. So I definitely feel like it's a very like it's a collaborative thing that we need to work on. So
100%. And conversely, too, there's nothing more that makes me happy than seeing folks like yourself doing non-Indigenous stories as well. It's not like we
mhm.
can't cover what's going on there. So, like, I will talk about in my next podcast probably the death of, Johnny Goudreau, because I'm in Calgary, so this is a big deal, right, for us. And
Of
so,
course.
and just it's a non-Indigenous story, but regardless, it's still something that's very much affecting this area. So I respectfully understand exactly what you're saying. And we have some great
Hmm.
reporters out here, and they regularly ask me, we really want to cover this story. Are you comfortable with that? This is how we want to frame this. Are you comfortable with that? So, like, even
Hmm.
for myself, I've struck up some good relationships with some non-Indigenous reporters. There was one incident at a rally that I was just shocked at the way this one person behaved. So
Hmm.
won't be helping that fellow anymore, but all of the other ones I will. So
Yeah,
um
yeah, there's definitely, yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was speaking of collaborating between the two worlds. One of the things that brought us together was this wonderful Pod Summit that's coming up. And I'm really excited to meet you in person and to have you here in Calgary. So I wanted to ask you, how did you get involved in the Pod Summit?
Yeah, this is a great story, and I'm glad you asked because I like telling people the story because I think it really it has this level of curiosity and grassroots and what can come of two people talking, right? So I'd seen this Pod Summit website. It wasn't really done up too much. It looked like the last summit was kind of before COVID or just after COVID.
Sure.
And I was like, it's kind of cool and interesting. And I at the time I had a friend I wanted to go see in Calgary. So I just messaged the website. I'm like, this is who I am. This is what I'm doing. I know there's no indigenous content, in your summit right now. And I got a response back. And this guy had actually just bought in the rights, Tim. He'd bought in the rights to the summit, and he was just starting off. So he hadn't even planned the venue or anything. It was just I just caught him that he bought this thing, and I just sent him a message, right? And took over this thing. So it's been a very slow process, but a very good one because me and Tim got to know each other. And then he said, I would love to have you here. I told him I don't want any money. I just want to show up and help. Like it was just more like I wanted to be a part of something special. And I also was really struggling to find anywhere in Western Canada, in Canada alone, let's say, where
Sure.
it's like a very podcast orientated place to go, right?
Yeah.
There have been some in Vancouver, they got canceled, they moved to online, and that
Mm.
didn't happen again. There's been some in Ontario and Toronto that are, again, there's some podcasts and stuff there too, but Western Canada, nothing of quality, in my opinion, at the time. So yeah, that we started talking, and then we developed, we found some of the podcasts I was doing and the projects I'm doing, and he wanted to really inspire people in this sense of like, I don't want to just people to sit there like, how do I do a podcast or what mic should I buy? It needs to be more depth, out of the box, more meaning. And he found that in some of the work that I'm doing. And that's kind of how that happened. And here we are, we're in September now, the time I'm talking to you, and we're only like a couple weeks away and a couple days to really showing Calgary, Alberta, and Western Canada what a great podcast community we have, and hopefully support each other and provide ideas and help everybody else grow together, right?
Oh my goodness. So, like, just music to my ears, I tell you. And so when I just wanted to tell my listeners, like, what had happened was you actually reached out to me, and I was so grateful you did. I know that my husband had gone to one of the first pod summits, and it was just kind of exactly what you said. What mic are you using, et cetera, et cetera. And my husband, who's my producer and editor, he regularly gets messages, and if they're Indigenous people, of course, he just talks to them for free about it, and talks about getting started, getting going. And so many folks have podcasts now, which I think are incredibly important. And one of the folks that we have coming actually is Kels, and they're from Queer in Alberta podcast. And I've already had them previously on my show. And I got to see them and meet them just this weekend at Pride. So it was a really exciting time for me. And we, both of us, are going to be on a panel discussion with another person as well, who actually advocates for disability rights. So I'm super, super excited about that, and super excited about the Pod Summit in general. And just, I seen the itinerary already out. I've tried to share it. So for folks who may not know, check it out and please come join us. Like, how great would it
Yeah.
be if you're thinking about podcasts, if you're just, an enjoyer of them. I mean, I like Comic Con, so I go to Comic Cons. Come to the
Yeah,
Pod
it's the
Summit.
same. Like I would be very, very safe to say it's a Comic-Con version for podcasting. I don't see that being an issue. And that's I think what Tim wanted to really design something very unique in that sense that again, it didn't want to be just rigid, like this is 1A, 2B. It's like, there's something for everybody. Obviously, there's going to be people there with, in the industry that have stuff to sell, and that's okay too. It's no bashing to that at all. But just trying to surround the basics with something more in depth, more exciting. And yeah, with my presentation, for those that are listening that are kind of just curious if they're thinking about this, is so the podcast that I'm going to be focusing on, I do several of them, but one of them was based off of elder recordings from the early 2000s. So those elder recordings just kind of happened, and then they sat for many, many, many years. And then the language program that had been revitalized within my nation over the past while now, came into some funding. Education Without Borders so wanted to basically enlist me and our radio station to grab those recordings and turn them into a podcast, and that's what we did. And we just, because those recordings are 2-3 hours long sometimes, and there's a lot of
Amazing.
thinking and humming and hawing because they're elders and they need their time and space, right?
Yep.
So we grab those moments, we turn them into a podcast. It goes great. I think it's over. It's not over. Education Without Borders comes back and say, what if we turn this into a graphic novel? So then all of a sudden, now that conversation that project's been going on for a year and a half. I just picked up the first proof the other day. Now we're doing our final corrections. It's going to go to the printer. So really exciting stuff. So if people want to
Amazing.
kind of learn that process of like what something so simple can turn into something so amazing 2 times over, and the success that can come from that, then this is a great presentation to watch and to listen to. And I'm trying to say that humbly, but it's not coming off that way, but I'm trying
No, it is.
to.
And you know what? I think that this exact conversation is exactly what we need to do more of. We need to have those podcasts with the elders and talking about things because like we have the technology to do it now. Right. And
Mhm.
and my longest episode I've ever had was with the two-spirit elder. And she just talked so much about her journey and such. And before you know it, it was hours long. So, I understand where you're coming from. And then the idea to have like this graphic novel, one of my favorite books of all time is that Canada 150. That's a graphic novel. One of my
Mhm.
favorite books ever. And I wish more people would, read our content, watch our content, et cetera, et cetera. So to me,
Mhm.
this is super exciting. And I'm so excited for you. And I
Yeah,
can't wait to
thank
watch
you.
this presentation. This is why I get excited. And that's why I'm excited to go because some days I kind of feel like, oh, I kind of get stuck in a rut. But then like this morning I got this private message. I can't believe what I just read. And so it really
Mhm.
inspired me to keep going. And then talking to you inspires me. And then to hear about this presentation, I have a
Wow.
local elder. I've been trying to put together money to give to him so that we can talk about his story, serving in the military, because he has this incredible story. And I cannot wrap my head around why Veteran Affairs, etc., haven't just spent the money for someone like me to do it. So, but
Yeah.
I also have to go find and apply to the right places so that he can get properly compensated. So,
Of course.
it's absolutely, the most important thing for me to hear elders, but to hear their stories and for the
Mhm.
next generations to be able to hear that as well. I
Of
just
course.
recently lost my granny, and I'm so glad my daughter got
Sorry
to
to hear
spend
that.
so much time with her because she was just funny, right? Like just a
Mhm.
fun person. So I'm glad she got to have that fun time with her as well.
Mhm.
Anyway, so yeah,
No,
I'm so
that's great.
excited to meet you and
Yeah,
and
I'm
to
excited
to
to
have you
meet you
come.
too. Thank you. And you know what? You were talking about something there about like getting funding for other projects. And that kind of ties in this the other part of the presentation is that I'm so lucky enough that the Indigenous Screen Office funded my trip to come to Calgary. So they sponsored me to go, which is amazing. And then just sort of again more communication between Tim and myself. Now we have the Indigenous Screen Office coming to the presentation as my guests. So when I'm done my presentation, then we'll have Isabel come up and she's going to be there on stage with me. We're going to go ahead and have trying to answer people's questions. People, especially Indigenous producers, podcasters, anybody who would have a benefit of being able to talk to the Indigenous Screen Office face to face.
Right on.
So
Actually,
that's
knowing
really
that,
exciting.
okay, I have to tell
Yeah.
you, I'm one of the graduates of the TikTok Indigenous content creations,
Oh,
and
nice.
it was funded by them. So that's
Hmm.
the only reason why I got in. And so I was
Yeah.
really grateful for that. That doesn't mean I'm like, oh man, there's so many cool content creators on TikTok.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm just like, this old lady saying, hey, stop colonialism. But for them, they know how to do all the cuts on the video, and they have these really cool graphics, and
Yeah.
they bring their sense of humor into it. So I just think it's a wonderful program. So I'm going to wear my TikTok sweater now, and I'm going
As you
to
should.
thank them. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, no,
Yes, I
Isabel,
appreciate that.
yeah, I had a good chat with Isabel. We kind of did a pre-Zoom the other day just to get to know each other so we're not complete strangers on the stage there. And now we had a great talk, and she seems really knowledgeable and very approachable. So I'm excited for that too. And then after that presentation too, it leads into lunch. So
Yep.
we'll do a meet and greet with myself and her, and we'll, anybody who wants to come up and talk and do more brain picking or ask more questions, we'll be there. So I'm excited. I mean, I haven't been to Calgary in a while too, so I'm excited to go.
Amazing. Actually, if you haven't, then I was talking to my husband. We need to buy all the chapstick and just give them out to everybody while we're here, because like all the folks that are not from Calgary, they need
Yeah.
chapstick. They just don't know it yet.
Dried lips, especially when that cold hits and we being in a BC summer, I'm sure it's going to hit me hard.
Right. And we're also at 3,500 feet, right? So what the higher altitude, and a lot of people don't realize, that's why you need the lotion. That's why you need the chapstick here, because it is just, we're altitude, we're dry, and then it gets cold, and everybody's like, why are my lips so chapped? And why are my hands so dry?
Yeah, that's true. I've been to Edmonton lots though. I got family in Edmonton, so I'm aware of the Alberta temperature vibe there for sure.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, we can say Edmonton on the show, but I'm just kidding. I'm just
Okay,
kidding.
sorry. Oof. Okay. Forgot who I was talking to. Yeah.
Calgarian here.
But
Well,
can I tell you, that's what, sorry, I was going to say that's also why I approached you, because I just thought it was very well, the way that you've labeled your podcast is great, because I just wrote Native Calgary podcast, and obviously yours are the first one that came up, and then when it's been nice to reach you that way, and so you market it well, and then I listened to your podcast, and I thought this would be a great person to have, and I'm excited to meet your husband too.
oh, we are so excited for this, actually, because again, it's that one of those things, getting inspired. And another one he produces is actually a recovery one. So I'm hoping that the host from that will come with us, and it'll be, us three walking around, getting to know
That's
folks,
great.
and hopefully being inspired to, continue and do more, and just talk to other people who might be interested in learning. It's just going to
Mhm.
be a fun meet and greet, I think, and networking opportunity. And hopefully we'll be able to promote each other's podcasts, and talk about the things that we all want to talk about, because love the TVs, love the news, but it's just been such a shift in pivot in
Mhm.
multimedia. So, things are different now. And folks like you and I not only have space sometimes in the mainstream media, but having podcasting, etc. Like it's fun to do. And I'm trying to
It
figure
is.
out how to be better at TikTok. So
That's good. Yeah, you and me both. I'm still trying to figure that out too. So,
well, thanks a million for coming on today. Is there anything else you'd like to add before I let you go?
yeah, I mean, I'm really grateful. Thank you for having me. And it's been nice to talk. Sorry it's so short and sweet, but lots going on over here on Vancouver Island. But no, I'm really excited to come to the Pod Summit. I'm really looking forward. I didn't realize how inspired and exciting and interest people would have to not only come and see my presentation and meet me and interact with me and the Indigenous Screen Office, but also just the summit in general. So I was really hoping for the best for it, and Tim and his team have done some great work, and it's going to happen, and it's really exciting. And if your listeners are listening to this before September 20th and 21st, there is a promo code, the Pod Summit 15. So if they type Pod Summit 15, it's 15% off the tickets. So anybody that you're inviting, give them that Pod Summit 15 code, and then it gives them a little discount too. And that's all I got. Thank you for having me.
I'm so honored. I totally respect your time. I appreciate you coming on. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I can't wait to meet you.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Thanks for having me.
Right on. Oh, it was wonderful having him on today, and I just say thank you all for listening, and I hope that you do consider coming to the Pod Summit, especially if you're, interested in meeting a few folks that do that work already here. We're gonna be there, and there's gonna be some other folks doing some fun stuff, and I hope that more people are inspired to say more and do more. Just wanted to give another shout out to our book club selection that we're going to be doing here shortly. Unbroken by Angela Sturrett. She's such an amazing person, and I'm really excited to finally read her book. It's so hard. Sometimes I'm gifted a book and I can't make the time to read it. So that's why I started the book club, so that I could just get into a book and force myself to read the book that I was given, and then to be inspired again by another amazing person, another journalist in this case. So yeah, it is every second Monday of each month. If you're interested in being a part of it, just let me know. I will send you the Zoom link and then you can come join us. And of course, if you're an avid listener, you already know we put it up onto the podcast afterwards, just so that people can hear what we thought of the book. And in some cases, but not in Angela's case, that's for sure. I can't wait to talk about it. I'm proud that this podcast has given solutions and includes cultural safety training or cultural first aid in all of them, to try to create a safer space for Indigenous, people of color, those with disabilities, and to us LGBTQ to speak. According to the 2023 Quality of Life Report from the Calgary Foundation, 88% of racialized Calgarians feel uncomfortable or out of place because of their religion, ethnicity, skin color, culture, language, accent, gender, or sexual orientation, which is actually up from 75% in 2022. 84% of racialized Calgarians believe that racism exists, as opposed to only 66%. I want to say thank you to Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Fritkin of heretohelp.bc.ca. They have an excellent section on what is Indigenous cultural safety and why I should care about it. Their work are, cultural action tools. So please support Indigenous and non-Indigenous work like that as part of your reconciliation work and settler understanding. I'm just lucky enough to repeat it here and highlight it. Internalized racism and lateral violence is another form of violence Indigenous and marginalized folks experience by the structure of racism on these lands. If you have some cash, give it to Donna Bevins at racialequitytools.org. She has tons of resource files and a piece on what is internalized racism, which I believe anybody from equity-seeking groups should absolutely go and remember. We're being oppressed. It's not our fault, but we also have to be kind to one another and learn solidarity. Do's and don'ts for bystander intervention by American Friends Service Committee. So that's afsc.org, and they have some do's and don'ts. If you're local to Calgary, acttoendracism.ca or text at 587-507-3838. That's where you can report racism locally to a non-policing agency. Anyone who follows me on any of my social media should watch the anti-racism organizational lead for the city of Calgary, giving the internal committee presentation on the journey of becoming an anti-racism leader. It's a YouTube channel, about an hour long. I haven't heard anyone say, oh my God, I was so inspired to watch and learn. And so if you have, I'd love to hear from you. Locally, we have Taylor McNally and Adora Nufler, who are being legally targeted. Both Stop the Stack YYC and Walls Down Collective are places for, people of color, for folks who want to help people of color, and for folks who want to maybe help with their legal funds. Please put that there. Indigenous people have been talking about our issues, sharing our traumas in reports, commissions, and public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor our words, honor the treaties. Listen to politicians and their policies and platforms. If they don't recognize the marginalized in their budget with Gender Equity Plus, if they are cutting violence prevention programs and services, Indigenous education, uterus health choices, gay-straight alliances, lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disabilities, know that your vote to that person or party is going to negatively impact folks who are already oppressed. Demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the multiple reports on child welfare reform and violence prevention. We also have 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit. Provincially here in Alberta, the Kenney government created 113 pathways to justice. They started the Premier's Council on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Municipally, we have the White Goose Flying Report. Denying these reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing extreme racism in the educational, health, justice, every institution you can think, with multiple reports that say the same thing. Demand change. If they don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, sexism, they have zero business being in positions of power. This should be understood by not just politicians, but community organizations, sports clubs, teachers, all of these institutions. There are wonderful articles all across the Googles on how to be allies for non-Indigenous Canadians to Indigenous people. Stephanie Harp and I did an emergency podcast. We're almost years ago at this point now. And we talk a lot about the crises that we're facing. Go back, have a listen to that. Go and follow womenshomelessness.ca. They have a great statement about their urgent action to protect the lives of Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse people experiencing homelessness. Sign up at aboriginalalert.ca to find out some missing folks that are in your area. You can also go to Missing Children Society of Canada. They are doing a better job of promoting Indigenous kids that are missing, and that's really important to me. We obviously have a drug poisoning crisis thanks to governments refusing to do the work of investment in addictions and pharmacy and beds and proper care in general. One of the folks that I actually follow is Ewan Thompson. I've had him on my podcast a few times, which reminds me I should probably have him on again. We have over 10,000 deaths here in Alberta since 2016 and over 2,000 last year alone. I think that, we just had National Overdose Awareness Day, and I have my Narcans here. I give out one for each nostril. If you're a status native in Alberta, you have access to 2 of these, come in a box, and you can give them to folks experiencing homelessness. Everyone should have them with them at all times. It should be looked upon as a Band-Aid at this point, where we all have a first aid kit. And it is a Band-Aid in the sense that because we don't, invest in beds and, culturally appropriate ways of dealing with trauma, we're still struggling here. So anyway, we are losing Indigenous people disproportionately to this drug poisoning issue right now. So if you are in active addiction right now, please don't use alone. If you are using alone, you can contact the National Overdose Response Service at 888-688-NORS. You can download the Brave, Doors, or Lifeguard apps. It's basically creating a safety plan because you matter and we want you here. As many of you know, I strongly support Freedom's Path Recovery Society.ca, where you can go donate. They provide free one-on-one addictions counseling services, group treatment for recovery in Calgary. They're queer-friendly and anti-racist. Many of you have heard I've been fully supporting Canada's first 2S LGBTQ addiction recovery center here, stonewallrecovery.ca. We just had Pride. I got to see Stephen. And so, donated all the monies. My straight cis tax went to the Calgary Pride as well. I thought that was really important. I bought some swag, bought their hat in order to, talk about these issues and know that it matters. I'm very much not in the financial position, but if I have $5, I'm going to give it to the organizations I believe in. And I just recently came across a mutual friend of mine named Taylor, And Taylor was talking about becoming the new executive director for a women's retreat that's up by the Edmonton area. And so I was looking into it, and it's about an hour outside of Edson, and that it's called the Sacred Turtle Women Healing Center. So I did share it on my socials, but also there's another place for folks to go to, and especially women, Indigenous women dealing with addiction and trying to heal. I strongly love Taylor. And so the fact that they are the interim president, I hope that folks will support that one as well. So if you're experiencing emotional distress after anything I talked about today and need to talk, you can call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness Helpline at 855-242-3310. It is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can also text at hopeforwellness.ca. If more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, you can call 844-413-6649. If it's national, of course. We also have a 60 Scoop group here in Calgary. It's called the 60 Scoop Indigenous Society of Alberta, actually, not just Calgary, ssisa.ca. The Indian Residential School Survivor and Family Hotline is 866-925-4419. Kids Help Phone is 1-800-668-6868. We can also text at 686868, and they have a live chat from 7 to midnight Eastern Time. Native Youth Crisis Hotline is 877-209-1266. Most places have a distress center or functioning 211. You can also go to 988 or text 988 or go to 988.ca. And the LGBTQ youth line no longer exists, but they have a texting feature at 647-694-4275, or you can go to youthline.ca for more. I guess in Toronto, they have this great Indigenous-led crisis response pilot. So I'm hoping that's going well. I'd love to hear from folks about that. You can find out more at spirits.org. For my American friends listening, if you have Two-Spirit identity, you can go to strongheartshelpline.org or 1-844-7-NATIVE, which is 1-844-762-8433. itgetsbettercanada.org has tons of resources for 2S LGBTQ. I did see some of the orgs listed in Alberta, and not all of them practice anti-racism, so just be careful about that, and maybe try the MMIW G2 line. Violence is my everyday reality. Our next podcast is going to be ugly, talking about this actually. Every Indigenous generation faces it. This is self-care, how I take my power back. This is why I started the podcast, to speak freely without interruption, without tone police, leadership shaming, gaslighting questions, as many people don't want to hear my opinion, but sure like to tell us about theirs. Even if they know nothing about us, colonialism, constant surveillance of Indigenous people, our protests, our vigils, and our rights. I and many others share info on microaggressions daily, so it's just unacceptable anymore. Learn about being trauma-informed. Folks like me are dealing with internalized racism, gatekeeping, and folks that survive off the status quo, or people who are so in their trauma that they deplete the everyday resources. Internal and external racism is an everyday reality for folks like me, Indigenous peoples, folks with disabilities, QT, BIPOC, and more. Masi Cho to my ancestors, to my granny, my mom, what strength looks like through their examples. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt, my stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian roots. Thank you to my husband, Big Buffalo Rock Man. He has produced and edited the show. He's my husband, my childhood friend, father of our child, and he's witnessed decades of racism and sexism as a result. And to our child, we are blessed to learn from you daily, and we are so honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. I hope my daughter and my family will be proud in the future of us discussing these present day issues. I honor the Blackfoot, first of all, because I'm on their land, but two, because the elders and members have been so kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot, and Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce my name in Satu Dene. My humblest apologies to the elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or your questions. I also have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pen posts on social media. And, for the touch grass moment that, I know I talk about a lot of dark, dark things. And so I actually got some feedback today that I was really shocked to get. As many of you know, I was getting a lot of hate mail from that stupid pretend Indianism, bull crap that people threw my way, and to show my, status card to some folks because they're jerks. So anyway, I wanted to read to you something that I was shocked by this morning. And it said, "Hi, I've been listening to your podcast all week, and I wanted to say I found a lot of comfort in your recent podcast talking about ADHD. I've been living with ADHD since I was 7, and now I'm 28. People seem to think we can just shut our minds off, and it's not really that simple. I struggle so much with emotional regulation. I am not Indigenous, but I am an ally. I have so much respect and appreciation for all the work you do. I am listening to your podcast right now, and I swear listening to you talk is helping me so much. Literally, I have the hardest week ever. Thank you so much for your podcast. It is truly life-saving." And I said, "Holy, that's some great feedback. And we obviously need to be talking about ADHD way more. If since it's interesting because you have the mainstream who's like, oh God, let's talk, and they don't mean it, and they let go of the very people that have ADHD or autism because they just don't quite fit in. And I know that there's all sorts of legal options, but those are for very privileged people. So if you are one of those people who actually was able to fight the system and win, I'd love to hear from you, because I don't hear those stories very often, but it was lovely to get that. So I appreciate the folks the person who sent that to me. And I want to end by giving side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not tradish. My beautiful cousin responded, "Are you be in my dish?" Thanks, folks, for listening.